And the true culprits of these murders, the murderers, are the ruling, rich, mother fudge nutters. We'll keep it clean for the kids who run the systems that could be stopping this nonsense. There is no reason people should go without in this land, except that capitalism requires a certain number of people to be just churned up into a fine dust, ground up into a paste. And now we know the exact number, 183,000 a year, which is 500 a day. 500 a day. 500 a day. Povertied to death. Lives stolen by this trash heap economic atrocity. And the true culprits of these murders, the murderers, are the ruling, rich, mother fudge nutters. We'll keep it clean for the
Corporations. Give corporations a voice. Give corporations a voice. I mean, corporations in Delaware literally outnumber people 2 to 1, but they still want to give corporations more power. The capitalists will never be satisfied. In this country, you can predict who's going to win an election at around a 90 to 95% clip based on who raises the most money. Now, that is what dictatorship of capital looks like. Our current president, Jim Crow Joe. You gotta know he was the senator from Delaware, right? Joe Biden, the senator of MBNA. That's what he was considered. Joe Biden, the senator of the credit card companies who supported the bankruptcy bill that destroyed the working class, created a student loan debt crisis as we know it, and created a boom of racial income inequality. Now, that guy's president. So, our current president was manufactured and bankrolled by financial institutions and the capitalist class in Delaware. And people think it's a coincidence that he's our president now? Still think we don't live in a capitalist dictatorship? I told you guys that we live in a capitalist dictatorship. So check this out. Delaware City is set to give corporations the right to vote in elections. Because, corporations in America did not have enough power as it is. Where are the politicians looking out for the corporations? Give corporations a voice. Give corporations a voice. I mean, corporations in Delaware literally outnumber people 2 to 1, but they still want to give corporations more power. The capitalists will never be satisfied. In this country, you can predict who's going to win an election at around a 90 to 95% clip based on who raises the most money. Now, that is what dictatorship of capital looks like. Our current president, Jim Crow Joe. You gotta know he was the senator from Delaware, right? Joe Biden, the senator of MBNA. That's what he was considered. Joe Biden, the senator of the credit card companies who supported the bankruptcy bill that destroyed the working class, created a student loan debt crisis as we know it, and created a boom of racial income inequality. Now, that guy's president. So, our current president was manufactured and bankrolled by financial institutions and the capitalist class in Delaware. And people think it's a coincidence that he's our president now? Still think we don't live in a capitalist dictatorship?
U.S. politics is basically a plutocratic state where public policy has been taken over by several powerful lobbies, each one devoted to its specific area. And they keep the control over U.S. policy through campaign contributions, because our election campaigns are funded by billionaires and by corporate lobbies. And they cost about $15 billion now for an election cycle. And you may have seen George Soros yesterday said, I give my empire to my son. And the son said, I'm going to fund the Democratic Party. Well, that's the billionaires that he'll put in hundreds of millions of dollars. $1 billion would not be surprising in the 2024 election. And then there are other billionaires. And so what are the lobbies? Wall Street controls financial policy, and our health lobby controls our unbelievably expensive private so-called health system. And our ag lobby controls the food industry with about 60% obesity or overweight in the United States. Another huge, very serious public health crisis. And the military-industrial complex controls foreign policy, not just military policy, foreign policy. So we have perpetual war and trillion-dollar military budgets, $900 billion in the Pentagon budget, but there's a lot more. There's the CIA, and there's Homeland Security, and there are many other categories, Department of Energy with nuclear weapons and so on. It's maybe $1.2 trillion a year. So that's on the spending side. On the revenue side, we have unanimous agreement among the billionaires. Don't tax us. It's very simple. So we have a low tax collection in the United States, and this spending on the military, for example, which has cost about $6 trillion in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and some of the other wars. $6 trillion. It's a lot, by the way. It starts to add up a little bit. And so our debt crisis comes from a broken political system. It's not so interesting, Democrats and Republicans, by the way. That's a little bit a children's game. The oligarchy the plutocracy is both parties. And I lost interest in the because it's basically a game.
Welcome to a very, very special edition of the Nick and CJ show. I'm one of your hosts. I'm CJ. What's up, Nick?
What's popping, my friends, my family? We have a fantastic show for you today. We had a great lineup of guests for you guys this week.
Yeah.
And I love how he said he don't even play the red-blue game anymore because it's more of like a child's game. And it's almost like when you done with the red-blue game, it's almost weird looking at the people who still does. Because almost like they are playing the game. It's almost like they're doing a dance. Like you watch.
It's like a Twilight Zone for me. I'm looking like, do you not realize this is fake? But go ahead. Or Truman Show, maybe more accurate for those. It's an old show where look up the Truman Show. We'll talk about it. But yeah, it's similar to that where you feel like you're in on it. You feel like you know, but everybody else doesn't know this is a play. Go ahead, Nick. Sorry about that.
Imagine you at the mall, right? And then you see people start fighting. But they're not really fighting. This guy hits the other guy with a Stone Cold Stunner. Then the other guy does a Hulk Hogan leg drop. Then they start throwing a few fake punches. That was like for us to watch people who engage in the red-blue game. Like you guys are sparring, but you guys are fake sparring because you guys support the same empire. So with that said, we got a lot of great things to discuss. And one story we're going to get to is like a preview of the debate on Ukraine that we're going to see among the NATO left, where many quote-unquote progressives are going to take the right-wing side. But before we get to that, we want to introduce our guest. This longtime friend of the show, great independent journalist. Thank you for joining us, Lee Camp. Thank you for joining us on RBN.
Thanks for having me, guys. How you doing?
What's up, Lee?
We also have another banger for a guest for you guys. We also have our great friend, another great independent journalist. Thank you for joining us as well, Garland Nixon.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Hey,
yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
This is
awesome. I've always wanted to have like and I talked to both of them behind the scenes or in a DM. I've always wanted to have this where we're having multiple like views, and I don't know if I've seen Garland and Lee together much in too many interviews, and that was one of the first ones I was like, wow, I would love to see both of them. So
Well,
in the
back
same interview,
back
talking
when
about the same
Garland had a
topic.
show, I did it a bunch.
Oh
We had
wow,
the radio show.
oh
Yeah, we've
the
been
radio
friends.
show.
We've been friends for several, and I've come to his to when he had Redacted. I used to go there regularly. So Lee and I have been friends for years.
Right on, right on. But go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I'm interested in getting you guys' take on the Western media coverage regarding the Wagner coup on Russia. And you guys see how they all calling Putin weakened and Russian is weak. Russia is so weak. We must send more weapons to Ukraine right now. So I want to give you just as a warm up. I want to give you a general take. There's been a lot going on over the last few days, like the state of the Ukraine war. You have the entire Democratic Party, the entire Uniparty that's falling behind on it. I noticed the Republican Party. They are way more behind it now that Tucker Carlson is gone. He's gone, so now they got the red light to be 100% for it. So I start with Garland, then we go Lee Camp next. You can give your thoughts on the whole Russian coup and the Western media coverage of it. I think the desperation they showed was hilarious. But Garland can start. Now I pass the Lee Camp after that.
Sure. I'll start with this. The current state of the Ukraine war. This is the way I've been putting it. It's kind of like a chess game. If you ever play chess and you look, and let's say you're looking at 3 moves out and you're saying checkmate. But everybody looks at the board and you say, I do this and you'll do that. I can do this. And everyone can see within the next 3 moves, it's checkmate. So the game's over. There are still moves that can be made, but everybody can look at the board and see this game's over, clear the board and start again, right? When I look at Ukraine and I see now that basically they call it a mobilization, they're literally kidnapping people off the street, taking them to like Germany for 6 weeks of training. And then they're sending them back and putting them in a Bradley and sending them out in the middle of a minefield, basically kidnapping victims pushed into the middle of the minefield. And they're calling that an offensive. When I see that, I say, it's over. The war is over. There is no military plan. There is no military mind which can say we are down to putting kidnapped people into a Bradley and telling them there's the minefield in that direction. Get all of your little vehicles on the line, go out into the minefield and get blown up. I see no way that this thing isn't really militarily. It's over. The whole Prigozhin thing, I'll say this about that. You can call it an attempted coup. The reality is this: the idea that 8 or 10,000 soldiers in a column going down the road to Moscow literally presents a threat to the government. If in fact 10,000 guys could get on the road and drive to Moscow and overthrow the government, Biden would have done that a long time ago. He'd have made 11,000.
That's a great point, Garland, because I don't know if you've been seeing how they cover it, but they cover it in a way like, oh, Putin got lucky. It's a coin toss that he could have been out of power. He got lucky, but go ahead, Garland.
No, there were, Prigozhin is, if you look at his record, here's a guy who did 10 years in jail for armed robbery. It's not like he's, some brilliant political mind that's going to think this thing through. He is a bit unhinged. I personally think that in a way, the Russian government's better off because Prigozhin is very unhinged and he's been saying all kind of unhinged, crazy things that the Russian government hasn't liked at all. And they're probably happy that he finally made his move and they can get him done, get him out of the way once and for all. I think we're now going into I'll finish by saying this. We're heading into this NATO meeting in the next month, in the next few weeks in Vilnius. The reality is this: if NATO had the a military capability to enter to have some kind of a fight with Russia, I think they do it. But at this point, they're basically out of military equipment. If you look at what is literally, they say that the British could put together maybe 25,000 actual combat troops. So NATO does not actually have the military capability right now to enter into the conflict. So it is what it is. I see it playing out, and I see this eventually in a collapse. That's the word I'll use. At some point, militarily, politically, Ukraine is going to collapse based on the direction that we're going now. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, a lot of great things said there. I want to get Lee Camp in the conversation. Anything you want to add? Your general takes on the recent developments in Ukraine and the Western media coverage of it.
Yeah, the funniest thing to watch for me was like you said, the Western media coverage. I mean, they started the moment that started happening, they started jumping up and down saying it's a coup, Putin's days are numbered, it's over, it's over. And then the following day, you have those same clowns who got it all wrong, and now now the coup is over rather than Russia being over. Got it all wrong, sitting on the same TV shows, going, well, here's what's going to happen. And it's like, dude, yesterday you got everything wrong. Why are you the analyst? I mean, it's just, it's pathetic. And of course, this is the way the U.S. treats any one of our enemies when we want to try and bring them down, is everything's going to end civilizations that have been around for 1,000 years. You know, like there's 4 protesters in China and the U.S. says, oh, China's collapsing. Meanwhile, you have, Black Lives Matter protests in the U.S. They didn't say, oh, the U.S. is done for. So it's just this complete hypocrisy around those type of things, and it's U.S. media is just clown.
Lee, are you telling me the analysis from Ann Applebottom? Are you telling me that she don't have a great grip on what's going on, because she said this is Putin's Tsar's Nicholas II moment? I think she wrote. Yeah. And then the next day she was like, "Man, why did the Wagner group people give up?" Like.
Well, and furthermore, as I think Mark Ames said on Twitter, if there is one thing that would make the West and the United States miss Vladimir Putin, it'd be all of a sudden Prigozhin is the head of the largest nuclear stockpile in the world. Like, do they think twice as to what it looks like if that coup actually worked? It's a catastrophic, but they don't care. They don't think that far down the road.
And let me add this, and I think this is important for people that don't understand the political dynamics going on in Russia. The political arguments in Russia are not between those who would prefer to continue the special military operation in its current form and those who just want to, call the neocons and surrender. No, the actual political argument in Russia is between those who the Putin government and those who feel he's being far too soft. See, if in fact there was a coup or a change of power in those who oppose Putin in Russia, it would be those who are saying, why are we not carpet bombing every city and flattening everything in Ukraine and firing Kinzhal missiles at every U.S. aircraft carrier? The fact of the matter is, if they would get what they wanted, which would be a change of government in Russia, the opposition to Putin, which there isn't a whole lot anymore, but the opposition to Putin would be the ones that say, let's blast the hell out of those people. What are we doing sitting here waiting, being so nice for? So that's the ironic thing about them, that even if they won, they'd lose.
And let me insert one part here. Do either of you or both of you can answer this question? Do you feel like this war in particular, the war propaganda, just seems to be falling so very short compared to maybe Persian Gulf War? It seems like this is much more transparently ridiculous to me. Are you sort of getting that feeling? I'll start with you, Garland, and go to Lee. Are you sort of getting that feeling, or is it just because we're immersed around people who are talking about it? Or do you get the feeling that like a lot of people are just, this doesn't feel right?
I think the big difference now is shows like this. People like the 4 of us who are in alternative media, who are, putting forward the information as best that we can find it, putting together going to alternative sources of information. During the Iraq War, you didn't have, the Jimmy Dore show and George Galloway and RBN, Lee Camp. You didn't have all of these people. We didn't have all of these YouTube and alternative media shows for people to go to. I think one of the things that is happening now is that there is a mass exodus from if you look at the numbers, CNN, Fox, etc., there's a mass exodus from mainstream media. People are going to alternative media. Let me say this real quick. The person who inspired me to do my YouTube show is on the screen beside me right now, Lee Camp. I was talking to Lee Camp one day, and I said, was talking about it, and Lee Camp said, Garland, people are thirsty for alternative media. The exact word he used. They're thirsty. And I thought to myself, well, hell, I might as well give it a shot. It took me about a year, but that always stuck in my mind. And it comes down to what we're saying. I don't think that the rhetoric they're using is any more or less effective. I think that there are other options for information that people are taking. And I think the people right here are those options. And I think we're all doing a good job.
Wow, Lee, you inspired.
Well, thank you.
Wow, that's a big wow. Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate that. I think the exact words I used were, Garland, how tough could it be to do a better show than mine? I suck. That was what I said, and he was like, wow, that is so true. But yeah, in terms of the mainstream media, I mean, yes, there is a mass exodus from these mainstream media outlets that try and keep all of the debate within a tiny little window of allowable thought. I mean, just look at who's advertising on Fox News and CNN. It's advertisements for hemorrhoid cushions. Their average audience is like 75. Like, it is not anybody under 50 watching those channels. So yeah, people are waking up to a lot of it. That being said, I wouldn't say that there was ridiculous propaganda during Persian Gulf as well. I mean, I think the WMD was a little bit off the mark, but it's just that people weren't as awake to it. People weren't, and the other thing is the U.S. kind of won that war, meaning they destroyed Iraq and killed 1 million people. Whereas now the U.S. side of this proxy war is losing. So you have to get more and more ridiculous propaganda to try and justify a losing cause. So it is getting truly hilarious. And I think, yeah, a lot of people are awake to it. And at minimum, even if they don't know what's going on the front lines in Ukraine, which most of us don't because the first victim of a war is truth. Most of us don't, but they know that what they're getting in the mainstream media is bullshit. So that's step one.
I'm going to add something else too, because I have a show in Los Angeles on KPFK, and LA is blue no matter who kind of land, right? And I was surprised because I got, like, when I first started doing the show and the war started, first couple of weeks I got this, oh, you're a Russian bot kind of stuff, right? But I noticed that more and more, and the calls that I get now when I open are, keep doing what you're doing. This is what Pacifica is supposed to be about. The calls I had, the general manager at my station here in Washington, D.C. at WPFW, the Pacific affiliate here, said, yeah, I had some people from the board tell me Garland is the great hope for KPFK. It's not that I'm some genius or special guy. It's that what we're all doing as best we can is to research various media outlets, not just the same old Washington Post, New York Times, to put it together and to give people some information and let them think about it, to give them some alternative information to think about it. And me being an anti-imperialist, I point out the contradictions of empire, the contradictions of neoliberal capitalism. When you point out the contradictions, people can't help but view. You can't argue against the contradiction. When I say, well, wait a minute, we say that you can't attack your neighbor. We say that Ukraine is independent and they should be able to do whatever they want and ally with anyone else. And then I bring up an article where the U.S. now says we should bomb Cuba because they're doing something with China. Oh, we should attack the cartels in Mexico. Literally. But now I point out, though, and I bring out an article and I point out these contradictions. I don't have to be a genius or some geopolitical, have a PhD in, geopolitics. I can simply say, here's what we say here. Here's what we say there. Let the contradictions of capitalism and the contradictions of imperialism speak for themselves. And that allows people the listeners to say, I'm figuring this out. Nobody's figuring out for me. And I think that's one of the things that alternative media tries to do.
I agree. Totally. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, well said. I want, since we're on the topic of Ukraine, I want to explain to you guys how unserious Zelensky is and why he does not want to pursue peace. And I think the Chinese peace proposal is pretty fair. And Russia's co-signed on the Chinese peace proposal that calls on respecting the sovereignty of people's nations. Meanwhile, Ukraine, you want to know what Ukraine said they want in order to end the war? They said they want Crimea back. unserious, unserious about ending the war. I'm asking you this question. We see how many Ukrainians are being slaughtered. Why doesn't Zelensky want to end the war? It's clear he does not want to end the war. If you're asking for a Crimea back, that's evidence that this is not a defensive war on your part. This is not defensive. Go ahead, Lee, if you want to chime in. It looked like you did.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few reasons he doesn't want to do it. One is, as Seymour Hersh reported, he and his cronies, Zelensky and his cronies, have filtered off the top about $400 million from the money coming in there. So that's a good reason. There's 400 million reasons to not stop the war. But another reason beyond that is, as we know, and as I'm sure you guys have talked about, there was a peace plan on the table over a year ago that was ready to be signed, and Boris Johnson, representing the United States, went running over there and basically said that, you know, if you sign something, the West is not going to support you. You will be on your own. And Zelensky knows that the only reason Ukraine is anything in this proxy war is the propping up by the West. So it basically, they said, you know, you're not signing a peace deal until we agree you can sign a peace deal. So that's yet another reason that Zelensky is not serious about peace. And of course, the U.S. doesn't care. Most of the U.S. There is a bit of a rift in the ruling elite about this, but for the most part, the U.S. doesn't care for peace in Ukraine. They helped create this proxy war. They wanted to bleed Russia. It's achieved some of the aims that the U.S. wanted, even though many of the sanctions have backfired. But they got to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline, so they, you know, that was a nice little perk of all this. So yeah, there are multiple reasons. There also could be the fact that you notice when the U.S. is done with a puppet president that they used for a few things, they generally get bayoneted in the streets, or they end up in a a U.S. prison like Noriega, or they end up hanged like Saddam Hussein. So the days after the U.S. is done using you for something are not a safe time.
Yeah,
and
go ahead, Garland. Go ahead.
You got to remember Afghanistan. I think he wants to end up like Ashraf Ghani in Afghanistan, because as you remember Ashraf Ghani, there was an article that I referred to a lot, where towards the end of the war, Ghani called the puppet president of Afghanistan. He called Biden and he says, "Look, the Taliban's overrunning all our positions. We're in deep and serious trouble." And Joe Biden said, "We need to maintain a perception, even if it's not true, that, you know, things are going all right. So I need you to say this and blah, 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 blah." And what happened with Ghani? In the end, Ashraf Ghani jumped on an airplane with $160 million in cash. As they were running down the tarmac, there were literally suitcases of money falling out. Anybody can look these articles. So he's getting on this plane. There's suitcases of money falling out. He hops on the plane and he flies away with $160 million cash, right? I think Zelensky's like, yeah, I think that's how I want this to end for me. He knows that this is going to be a flop at some point. As Lee said, the only question is, do you end with a bayonet sticking out of you, or do you get to take off with suitcases full of money falling out of the plane as you? And I think he looks at it, he's like, I'm going to opt for the latter. I want the suitcases full of money. So what does it boil down to? That he's an actor, that he's not a real player in this game. He's doing what he needs. He's got his 400 million, so he's already paid. How do I continue to play this role as long as they tell me? And then at some point, I'm out of here. He wants to be the guy what he doesn't want to be is, if you remember when they were taken off from, when they were at the end of the Afghanistan crisis, and these planes were taken off from Kabul, and they showed like these people falling off the plane, dangling from the fuselage, and they're like falling out of the sky. And I think what he knows is those are his options. Either he's the guy with 160 million, or he's the guy dangling off the landing gear from 1,800 feet as he falls to his death at the end of this thing. Those are his choices.
Yeah, he dug his own grave. And those great two analysis by Lee Camp. And this is another reason why Zelensky is not in any hurry to in this war. So you guys put unreasonable demands up and say we won't end this war unless we get Crimea back, saying nonsense. And then Zelensky says he's not going to have presidential elections until Ukraine wins the Ukraine conflict. So of course he don't want peace, because extending this conflict is another way that he can hold power. So isn't it funny, Garland, Lee, my brother CJ, how especially liberals in the West, that we are fighting for democracy. And here is Ukraine, who banned opposition parties, banned opposition media, banned different religions, and now they're saying we not even have elections. So, what are your initial reaction to Zelensky saying this? Go ahead, Lee.
Well, they say they can't. He says he can't have elections during a time of war. The U.S. has been at war for 100% of our time on this planet, and we have bullshit elections all the time. We have crap rigged elections all the time, even while we're at war. We could just take a page out of our book, Zelensky. We'll show you how to have a rigged election during wartime. I mean, usually we're bombing 7-8 countries. We're still having some kind of elections.
If you study Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, remember the discussion during the Civil War was whether he was even going to run or not in 1864, because they were losing at the time. And Lincoln came out and said, darn it, if I lose, I'm going to take my army and march on Richmond and end this thing anyway. You know, bottom line was this: the U.S. was in the midst of a civil war, didn't know if it was going to exist or not afterwards. And the U.S. was still going to have elections, World War II, on and on. But the bottom line is this: they have elected in the first place. The whole thing is a scam. The United States overthrew the government and installed puppets. So what would be the point of having a government? He outlawed his principal his opposition party. The guy who was leading him in the polls, a guy named Medvedev, he locked the guy up and put him on house arrest, threw him out of the country. So the reality is, when they've outlawed the left, the communists, the socialists, they're completely outlawed. They can't even be involved in the political process anymore. So the reality is this: if you look at what's going on now, it would be a farce for them to have elections in the first place when the government is being run by the Biden team back here in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. Now, I want to show you guys this clip from Joe Biden, because now we're gonna have the debate about Ukraine really start, and that's why it's not good for the establishment, because the establishment lost around 1/3 of the support for Ukraine since the start of the conflict, before the election public debate really began, before you had the exchange between Trump and Biden on this issue. Now you have Biden that's going to be forced to comment on this issue, and we know Biden is only going to make the case for his side even worse. But this slip right here, last year, there was this clip, or was it 2021, of George W. Bush, where he condemned Vladimir Putin for his illegal invasion of Iraq, and I joked at the time that the souls of the millions and millions of people they killed in this place of Iraq is eating their conscience. And apparently that's true, because I want to show you guys, this is Joe Biden, who has this, who's have a very interesting thing to say about Putin here.
It's hard to tell, but he's clearly losing the war in Iraq. He's losing the war at home. And he is...
He's losing the war where? He's losing the war where?
It's hard to tell, but he's clearly losing the war in Iraq. He's losing...
These people who were responsible, Biden was one of the people that helped manufacture consent for the war in Iraq. This shit is eating them alive. And they know that this is a foreign policy L that's going to be on the record for the rest of their life, no matter how much the West can manufacture consent. Lee, Garland, you guys see this clip? What was your guys' reaction to this?
Yeah, it's I think a great Freudian slip, and like you said, Bush did the same thing, where he called it the illegal invasion, Putin's illegal invasion of Iraq, and yeah, it's you know. These people, their minds are they can't keep, you know, they're destroying so many countries at once that it's tough to keep them all straight.
Yeah, and the other thing about it is too, when you look at the incompetence, when you look at the cognitive impairment of Joe Biden right now, one thing becomes clear. And you look at who they have second in charge, Kamala Harris, the only person whose brain probably is less functioning than Joe Biden is Kamala Harris, and she doesn't even have the excuse of age. But when you look at it, here's the reality that it brings out. And look at the other kind of leaders, that these other puppet leaders, Rishi Sunak, who is just like the brown guy holding a seat until they find another Anglo-Saxon person to put in charge of Britain, which he's not really in charge of Britain. Here's my whole point. you could have a cardboard cutout of Joe Biden. Now it's obvious they want the most incompetent person that they can possibly have to give the appearance of being in power so that the people behind them can tell them what to do and they can say yes. Biden's embarrassing them a little bit, and Harris would embarrass them even worse, so they can't put her. But they'd be happy to have Pete Buttigieg, whoever it is, that would get out and parrot the deep state or the corporate narrative and take the heat. When people didn't like what happened, they could point to this leader and say, it's this particular leader. It's not any particular leaders. This strange religion of neoliberal capitalism and neoconservatism runs from Biden to Bush to Trump to Obama. It's the same thing. They're just putting different actors in front of us. And actually in Ukraine, if you think of it, it's perfect. They got an actual actor.
Yeah,
that's what they should just get like another actor, get somebody from Hollywood and stick them in there as the president and move on. It would serve the same purpose.
This is what I was kind of referring to earlier. Like, it's so clear that this guy is not making the final decisions on anything. It's like it seems like everything is more like comical. Like, it's this, nobody can believe this. There's no way. That's what it feels like to me. It's a very
and that's why they love
moment.
having people like Biden and even Trump there to have someone to blame it on. And what you just laid out, Garland, is also the same contact that they used to justify their wars. Instead of explaining that Putin has the support of the vast majority of Russian politicians, the Russian people, approval ratings around 75 to 80%, because a lot of people acknowledge the threat of neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They say it's Putin's war. Putin is a madman. You guys see how their strategy, they want everything to be reduced to characters, comic book villains and heroes. So instead of explaining Russians' concerns over their security in Ukraine and why a lot of people in Russia agree with them, they may seem like Russia is is ran by an evil tyrant, because it's easy to get people to just think of things in black and white. Joe Biden the good guy, Vladimir Putin is the good guy. So it's a very important tactic of theirs. So I'm gonna show you guys the other. If you guys don't remember, this is the other fraudulent slip I found hilarious.
Russia otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia, and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine. Iraq. Anyway.
They know what they did wrong, and that's why when Joe Biden talk about the loss line, right? And then you have George W. Bush has this. I think we're gonna see a lot more over the next coming years. But another thing I want to get into, because this is gonna be a very weird election coming up, because we have the roles of both parties. I wouldn't say they flip, but they definitely taking very unique roles. Where the Democratic Party is unapologetically pro-CIA, unapologetically pro-FBI, and pro-war, while the Republicans are head-faking and pretending that they are anti-imperialist and anti-war. So the political discourse over the next few months is going to be extremely confusing, guys. Extremely confusing and extremely strange. I'm going to show you probably the first example of this that we're going to see. We have the NATO left, who's going to have to explain why they support the Ukraine war, and why their leftist principles lead them to support a policy that leads to the boom of weapon defense contractors in the military industrial complex. That's the left position according to them now. So now they got to debate the right wing that is now following the direction of Donald Trump, of Tucker Carlson, who's now questioning the Ukraine war. So you guys see this dynamic that's about to happen. We're going to have progressive, a rainbow flag, Black Lives Matter profiles, defend war against right wingers, and this clip is cringe beyond measure, because you're gonna see how the NATO left has no defense of funding the Ukraine war, at least not one that's coherent.
This is sad.
So we've seen the NATO left is so bad, they're allowing this guy to make him look bad, because we show you Rashid Tlaib was called out by Tim Pool and his people, because they asked her a very reasonable question. You say you are upset about the climate crisis, but you're telling young people to endorse Joe Biden a year and a half before the election, despite the fact that you support the Willow Project and the military-industrial complex as part of the climate crisis. So why are you guys allowing this lane for these people? Now, this is Tim Pool pressing Emma Vigeland, one of the voices of the NATO left, on why she support this war. And her answer, you will not believe. Let's go. Let's watch it full time. Then there's gonna be a lot of breakdown. You will not believe how awful this answer is. This is. Anyway.
Territory without recourse, then I mean that's pro-imperialism. That's not, and that's still pro-war.
No,
yes,
a lot of people around the world do a lot of bad things. I don't think the U.S. should be an empire going and funding wars all over the world.
We're not funding wars. We're funding the defense. I mean, like, and there's something that you can be said where should we draw a certain line? I have already conceded that strings should be attached and we should be involved in peace negotiations. But to flatten the power dynamics here, I mean, I would imagine this is like the same argument that you hear when it comes to Israel and Palestine, right? Where Palestinians are defending themselves. And then it's, oh my gosh, they are just it's completely symmetrical. Israel and Palestine. These are two actors just battling it out. I would love to fund the Palestinians so that they were able to have a better life.
You are to the right
themselves.
of me on foreign policy.
Well, we already fund Israel, dude.
Yeah.
You guys hear what he just said?
You are to the right of me on
policy. And this is what a lot of these right-wing commentators are going to be able to say. I'll let the last few.
Are you against that?
That's a tougher question. I don't have an answer to.
They played that on the Majority Report as this is a got you. CJ, they was proud of this clip.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing that they're proud of this. I thought this was ripped from somewhere and they tried to bury this. They put this out. Wow.
So this is where Emma Vigeland compares the United States funding Nazis in Ukraine to the apartheid state and settler colonial project against the Palestinians. I already debunked the bullshit, ridiculous comparison. It's actually ridiculously offensive. Like, imagine Nicole Mandela, the Palestinian Community Network, these people hearing this nonsense, comparing the Azov regime that waged war against ethnic Russians to the Palestinians being genocided by the Western-backed state. It's unbelievable, Garland.
Nick, let me just try. This just speaks again to the same narrative. It seems like I'm going to have throughout this episode is that this is so comically terrible. Like, how is anybody buying this? And let me add this before, and I want both of you to kind of comment what this added to it. This is where because I did several streams on. There's a realignment of the left. There is an absolute split where it's like, and she's part of that, the so-called left that is there's no longer, let's try to come together, Bernie coalition. There's no longer that going on. And it's just so weird to see this realignment where they're realigning with the military industrial complex. And they feel like we are realigning with the Red-Brown Alliance, if you let them tell it. But if you both could, take in the video and speak to that point.
It's only me. I'll play one more time. And I'm going to ask you guys about your response because I've been through this so many times. And this is the progressive excuse for supporting Nazis in Ukraine that they compare it to Palestine. This is disgusting. But
territory without recourse, then I mean that's pro-imperialism. That's not, and that's still pro-war.
No,
yes,
a lot of people around the world do a lot of bad things. I don't think the U.S. should be an empire going and funding wars all over the world.
We're not funding wars. We're funding the defense. I mean, and there's something that you can be said where should we draw a certain line? I have already conceded that strings should be attached and we should be involved in peace negotiations. But to flatten the power dynamics here, I mean, I would imagine this is like the same argument that you hear when it comes to Israel and Palestine, right? Where Palestinians are defending themselves. And then it's, oh my gosh, they are just it's completely symmetrical. Israel and Palestine. These are two actors just battling it out. I would love to fund the Palestinians so that they were able to have a better life for themselves. You are to the right of me on foreign policy. Well, we already fund Israel, dude.
Yeah.
Are you against that?
That's a tougher question. I don't have an answer to.
See, they think that's the got you. They don't realize how unhinged Emma Vigeland is comparing Ukraine to Palestine, considering the United States and the West
That is
literally
so sad.
created the Israeli state to steal land and commit a genocide against the Palestinian people, and the United States propped up and trained the Azov battalion regimes in Ukraine. Like, if you know history, you understand why this is a ridiculous thing to say. But sorry, I ran enough on this. I apologize, guys. I want to get Garland and Lee in. If you guys have any reaction, you can reply on the substance. Like, you don't have to comment on the character, but if you just want to reply to the argument, because it's so unhinged to me. But go ahead, Garland or Lee, whoever wants to chime in first.
Well, I'll say this: if you think about what she just said, it's obvious that she was fumbling around for something, because he said, why should we be funding wars all over the world? She said, we're not funding wars, we're funding defense, right? That was okay. Well, then why do you guys keep talking about Vladimir Putin's war if it's not a war? You know, we're not funding wars, we're funding defense. We don't have a Department of War, we have a Department of Defense. These words mean nothing. In reality, she knows we're funding wars. She's just looking for some words to duck her way out of it. And this is critical, because what he's saying is this: shouldn't we do what we need to do to stop the conflict? Even when she made her argument about the Palestinians, what is she saying? Now, what would I say? You should stop the violence against the Palestinians. You shouldn't be bombed and attacked and apartheid and all these things that are happening bad against them. Even then she argues, well, no, let's fund the Palestinians and give them some war machines, so now they can kill the Israelis and lots of people can kill each other and that conflict can go on, as opposed to ending the conflict. So it's, when I see that, I see one guy saying, why we got wars going all around the world, let's stop the wars. And the other people saying, let's fund them. And when it comes to the Israelis, she doesn't actually say, let's stop giving them stuff to kill the Palestinians. She basically says, well, let's give the Palestinians stuff so they can kill each other, keep this thing going. Plenty of deaths going on. It's what we do. But we don't fund wars. We fund defense.
She believes that we bomb for peace. Bombing for peace.
Right.
Go ahead, Lee.
Dude, it is so unhinged. It's tough to even come up with where, it's like an MC Escher painting of nonsense. Like, where does that staircase lead? What the fuck are you talking about? It's defense. The U.S. The Brown University cost of war found the U.S. has killed 6 million people over the past 20 years with just the global war on terror, just that aspect of our murderous regime around the world. Is that defense? Are we defending all those? Well, we defended 6 million people to death. And that's the left wing of our debate. What the fuck? The left wing. That is not left. That's not pacifist. It's not peaceful. But there is such a lack of any kind of anti-war thought, anti-war discussion that this is what passes for, I don't know, pacifists or left wing. It's pathetic. It's pathetic.
That's why we feel like we have to call them out, because they will co-opt and hijack what it means to be a leftist. We see what happened to the Green Party in Germany, the Green Party in France as well. And that's why we gave the Green Party we should straight up say, Howie Hawkins is done, are we gonna destroy them? Like, we're not gonna allow that to happen to the left here. And there's a coordinated effort, because Bernie agrees with that position. Emma Vigeland is ridiculous, but that's the Bernie Sanders position. That's the AOC position. So are we going to just sit here and allow them to hijack what it means to be on the left? Go ahead, Lee.
Well, and I love that she says, well, I think there should be strings attached. Yeah, who the hell's putting the strings on? Who is above the U.S. militarily that's putting the strings on us? And furthermore, I think there should be strings attached, and I think we should be involved in a peace plan. You can't involve the murderer in the peace plan. This is our proxy war. That's like, Jeffrey Dahmer should be involved in sitting down and talking about how to stop Jeffrey Dahmer. Are you out of your mind?
It's what I always say is illogical. It's their illogical nonsense, and maybe it's a PMC thing, but it always comes from this where they think they're explaining some sort of intricate sort of thinking that you have to have, and it literally comes off as being, this is comically bad, and that's what you saw.
I think they use it as a weapon. Like, when you see her in her argument there, they're trying to stun you with their stupidity.
Well, yeah.
And that's why when you first see the clip, you're like, "Where do we even fucking start with this nonsense?" And that's the strategy.
It's true. It's tough to debate because you're like, I don't even know what angle you're talking about. Like,
Yeah, and I think what's important also,
that's so
you know,
true. That's so true.
the discussion now of, and you know, the discussion is, well, people, they're mad people I agree with way more on foreign policy than I actually agree with on foreign policy as opposed to these people. But a lot of this isn't necessarily about left-right ideology. It's about what I like to call a crisis of epistemology. You know, how do we know what we know? Do we use critical thinking, right? It's a crisis of critical thinking because I can sit down with a person that I can disagree with, and we can have an intellectual discussion, a factual discussion, and I can say, I'm going to lay this information out here. And that person can say, and I'm going to lay that information out there. And you have a discussion and you can walk away and disagree. There are a lot of things going on now in Ukraine. If you start laying the information out, people left, right, wherever they are on the ideological scale, look at it and say, yeah, that makes sense. Right? There are things Tucker Carlson says, whatever I can think about his ideology, I'll look and say, yeah, that makes sense. And then someone else will say, and I'll look at it and say, that doesn't make sense. I don't have to agree with you on anything else, but I can look at it and somebody can say, hey, I don't think we should all die in a nuclear war. There, we got something we can work with. So I think what we're looking at is people who are really using critical thinking skills as opposed to those who are just going along with whatever the latest thing that they're told to go along with or to do. And there's a lot of us who push back, who when the government says, you got to do this, or you got to think this, or you got to go along with what we're doing, there are those of us who have so much mistrust that we automatically say, well, I think you're lying to me, and let me look at it and find out, as opposed to those who are out there saying, no, the government, they're here to help you. Don't, are you asking these people? You're coming up with questions and things? Put a stop to that. Be gone with you and do what you're told. And that's what we're looking at. People who's push back, people who have some level of distrust, people who want to dig and find the answers, as opposed to those who just go along with whatever the hell they're told on a given day by the people in power.
Yeah, well said.
Absolutely.
CJ, anything you want to add?
Yeah, let me.
We got Lee Cam. I know we got you guys just for a little bit here. So CJ, I'll give you opportunity. Anything else you want to add?
I was going to ask Lee about, because I know he was going to be leaving soon. I was just going to ask him about his article. But if you had something else to ask him, there's a particular article I wanted to ask that he wrote about.
Yeah, go ahead, CJ. Go ahead, CJ.
Yeah. Okay, so all right, so let me bring this up here. I thought it was very interesting because this was something I did not know. Did I put it on screen? Oh, my bad, everybody. There we go. Sorry. All right, so this article here, the 239 times the U.S. government tested bioweapons on America, and you actually put out a thread, but as I pull that up, can you talk about this article that you wrote?
Yeah, so it's actually I put it up as an article just the other day, but it's also a chapter from my new book, Dangerous Ideas. But so it's been reported on in kind of piecemeal if you really search some of these down. But Business Insider talked about how in September 1950, a U.S. Navy ship off the coast of San Francisco used a giant hose to spray microbes into the air. The military was testing a biological weapon attack, how it would affect the 800,000 residents of the city. At least one person died, 1,000 sickened. And so this is our military. It's one of 239 times that our military, our government, tested bioweapons on the American people. It didn't stop in 1950. It went on for decades. And there's countless examples of the U.S. literally testing bioweapons on Americans to see, they claim to learn the impact and all these various things. But I kind of went through a bunch of the examples of these, and these are not denied any longer by the U.S. government. Of course, they love to, when things come out 20 years later, they go, oh, that was way back then. We would never do anything like that now. But so I went through a lot of the examples of the U.S. testing bioweapons on Americans, and that's from my book, which
that is amazing.
For right now is only for members at leecamp.net. But yeah.
Absolutely. Let me just read a couple of these snippets you have here, and this is just to memorialize what you just said. As Business Insider reported on September 20th, 1950, a naval ship off the coast of San Francisco used a giant hose to spray microbeads. Is that how you say it? Microbeads into the air. Microbes into the air, into the city's smog. And now think about this. This is 800,000 residents. 800,000 residents. And you're saying now they don't even deny this. But this is a great thread. If anybody follows Lee, make sure you check this out and read it. But what the number that stuck out to me was 239 times. Now, have they stopped is the question, or do you answer that in your book, or do you even address it?
I don't answer it because I don't know the answer, but obviously they continue to test various things on American citizens, including, MK Ultra was the testing of mind control and various drugs. There's the Tuskegee experiments where they, sickened a lot. I don't know the exact number, but a lot of black men, and didn't tell them that they had made them sick or injected them with anything because they wanted to test what the results would be. They told them that they just kind of had quote unquote bad blood, and that's why they felt so sick. And there's just so many examples of this in historically. It is tough to know what continues today because much of it is within, CIA, et cetera, is within black budgets and classified and stuff. So, no, I don't really get into whether this is happening today.
Yeah, I have.
Go ahead, Nick.
I have one more story I want to get to.
If I could make a quick comment on that.
Oh, go ahead.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Quick
Sorry,
comment on that is add a couple of things. The same exact thing that they did to black people in the Tuskegee experiment, they did the same thing in Guatemala. There's a lawsuit that may still be going on against Johns Hopkins about that. There's another instance where the CIA tested the mind-altering drugs on an entire town in France, and the people got all freaked out. So yeah, it's going on. And let's not forget the anthrax scare. If you remember, when they did the test on the anthrax, they found that came from Fort Detrick in Maryland. And they said, oh, Dr. whatever his name was, so-and-so is the guy who did it. And before they could grab the guy, he committed suicide, surprisingly.
Of course. And meanwhile, the government wonder why people are not trusting of their officials because of their history, because of stuff like this. Now, I want to give you guys a reaction to this, what happening in France, because you have many people in the West and the media coverage saying that Putin is weakened, and they always run these stories about all the problems that China is going through. But you have France that face massive NATO protests. You had England economy that destabilized. They can't keep a prime minister. You have Emmanuel Macron who lost majority, and people are against him. But meanwhile, they talk about how weak Putin is. But you have massive protests in the United States in 2020 over police brutality, and the reason why this protest is so large, the same way the 2020 protest was so large. The reason why you see all these spontaneous protests in the West is because people sense that something is wrong. Like, it's not just because of one incident. Obviously, I think the French they take way less bullshit than we do, because as Americans justify the fascist authoritarian use of violence by our occupiers known as the police, the French see someone die and they're ready to hit the street. But I think this is boiled up frustration over neoliberalism and the hypocrisy of the West being exposed, and the people have an intense hatred of their government. And no matter how you feel about Putin and Xi Jinping, their approval rating destroys the approval ratings of the countries in the West. And I'm going to show you guys just a few images. I love this tweet here. This tweet says, it's finally happening. The countless sanctions on Russia has taken their toll, and people have begun to revolt against the Putin government. Just kidding. This is France. and that's why I talk like that, because the way they talk about our enemies is how I talk about our country. Because go ahead, Lee, if you want to.
Well, I was just going to say, some people say this is the sanctions on Russia that have backfired and are harming Europeans and Americans. But in many regards, this is not actually backfiring. This is part of the U.S. goal, was to put the European states back in a vassal state position, harm their economies. Blowing up the Nord Stream obviously harmed Germany and European nations immensely. And so part of this was the goal for the U.S. Much of it has backfired in a way that the U.S. elite did not intend for. But this part about European suffering, and they have largely been pushed back into a feudal position underneath the United States, because many of them, especially France and Germany, were growing outside of their chains to the United States, were cooperating with Russia, were cooperating economically. And so this is I mean, it's not completely the fault of the proxy war, but a lot of this is the economic stress from the proxy war. And these countries many of them have fallen into line with the United States underneath this situation. However, also Macron the other day did say that France is looking into joining BRICS, which would be a huge punch to the face of the United States.
I saw that headline. I was like, no way, that'd be so base. But anyway,
do you think that the United States is trying to put the Europe back into a vassal state? Do you think the European elites are going along with it, or they're doing it in spite, or they don't know? For example, like the Nord Stream pipeline, obviously Germany, they felt, the United States felt some type of way that they're making this pipeline or trying to do this pipeline with Russia, and so. Do you think the elites are in on selling out the European people, or do you think they're doing it the United States is doing it in spite or in secret without the elites knowing?
I would imagine that a lot of them feel their hands are tied. I mean, the U.S. is too powerful. They're afraid to go against the U.S. in this situation right now. But some of them, I mean, the thing is, they are also insulated. Like most of them are incredibly rich. So they don't really care about the people. So, it's not exactly a lot of sweat off their back if the people are suffering. But yeah, I think some of them know. Some of them are as dumb as our lawmakers, and they just fall for it.
You guys see how Bolsonaro's in Miami, so I think these leaders, like, if we destroy our nations on behalf of the United States, they will give us a mansion. They take care of us. But Garland, go ahead if you want to chime in.
I think the other thing to understand about this French situation is that some of it is again a result of imperialism and colonialism. If you look at the guy, he's a brown gentleman, right? Shockingly enough, the police have shot another brown gentleman. But the particular neighborhood that he was in is a lot of Muslim people, a lot of people of color, Black people, Africans, etc. What people have to understand is that in France, they don't have birthright citizenship. So you have someone who their parents or their grandparents came to France during a time when their country was colonialized, but they still didn't get citizenship. They can't get any of the benefits. They can't work above the table. They got to work under the table. So they're basically living in France, born in France, parents born in France, some grandparents born in France. But as a result of the colonialist actions of Europe, they cannot have a normal life. And so there's a lot of poverty and desperation. And of course, you know what that means. You get a lot of Black or Muslim or African people, poverty and desperation. They're going to be heavily overly policed. And you're going to end up with this kind of thing. So this isn't just by happenstance in France. It's similar to the colonialization that the U.S. does, the imperialism around the world, and the people in their own country are dealing with being colonized people who are living in that colonial power, just as Black people experience in America today.
Well said.
Well said. Now I have one more question. CJ, I don't know how much you have left, but I have one more, and then we get.
Just Lee, are you okay with one question, or you got to jet off right here, sir?
Yeah, I got like 5 minutes. Yeah.
It shouldn't be that long because I'm very interested on your guys' take on. I want you guys to reply to the story, but also your general take on the upcoming election as well, because we had Dr. Cornel West on yesterday. Who I think provides a great opportunity for third-party candidates. We must continue to hold them accountable and put pressure on them, which I think we have done on RBN. But I think he provides a great opportunity for third parties. And you can also share your thoughts on RFK. But I found this story particularly interesting. This is why I bring this to your attention. and you can reply to this and your thoughts on the election as well. You have RFK. They keep doing these interviews because he's polling at around 20 or so percent. And you guys know all my criticism of RFK, especially his stance on Israel-Palestine. But he has been a shock to Democrats. You have Mehdi Hassan, who RFK lives rent-free in his head. He's tweeting about him every day. Biden bros are terrified of this guy because of him challenging the Ukraine narrative, the war narrative, and challenging the COVID narrative as well. Like that's a threat to the establishment. So no matter how you feel about RFK, what they're doing in response to that is extremely shady. So he's having these interviews that are being pulled from YouTube. That now he's becoming he's more of a credible threat to Biden than Ron DeSantis is to Trump, and that's literally the facts, just based on polling. So you have the big tech YouTube that is working on behalf of the Biden administration by helping with the media blackout on him by removing his interviews on YouTube, which is why I think this is important to speak out on, no matter how you feel about RFK. Like this is crazy censorship. So you guys, this is the last question. I want you guys to respond to this. The YouTube pulling, and this is RFK. I guess I'll read it to you real quick. RFK says, YouTube just pulled another one of my videos with former New York Post political reporter Al Gart. People made a big deal about Russia supposedly manipulating internet information to influence a presidential election. Shouldn't we be worried about giant tech corporations doing the same? Which is like, this is exactly what they accuse Russia of doing. Russiagate, getting involved in elections. But Garland, Lee, you guys have any response to this and your general thoughts on how Democrats are handling RFK in general?
Yeah, I got a few things. One is there's certain things that RFK has said that I think are really important, and I've been highlighting them on my live streams every week or every once in a while. And I think that's great. It blows up a lot of the narrative of the Democratic Party. So many things. I highlighted one the other day, just him bringing up the harm of big ag, which is almost never talked about, and the way they control our food supply and destroy lives and destroy the environment. And so there's so many important things. Then, like you said, there's plenty to be critical as well. He says he'll take any money from anywhere, including billionaires. He's really put out some really full-throated defense of the CIA as a whole, which that's problematic in so many ways. So, yeah, there's a lot of problems there, as well as important things. And in terms of the censorship, they're not just going after his videos. They're demonetizing and taking down or giving strikes against whole channels who just have him on or highlight some of his videos. Yeah, it is an aggressive attack that everyone should be upset with, whether you love everything he says or not. But I just think, it is a bit of a fool's errand to try and be revolutionary in an anti-revolutionary party. So to run within the Democratic Party or the Republican Party is, maybe a fool's errand. I also can't stand the idea that we have to talk about the presidential election for 2 goddamn years. When you and I have talked about how fucking unimportant the president is in many ways and how much these two parties agree on everything, 80% of the core issues of this country, and we're acting like they're completely different. I mean, not you and I, but America's acting like they're completely different things when they're identical on so much of our world and so many of the issues. And so that's why I've decided I'm going to be actually a campaign manager for a grayish brown rock I found in my front yard that I'm running for president that is just so much better on all the issues. I mean, he's never committed a war crime, not in bed with any big oil, big banks, none of it, never been accused of sexual assault. I mean, this rock is just fucking incredible if you really compare him to the two main parties. And anybody can check it out. It's at yardrock2024.com. I think he would win a debate against any of these guys.
I do too. I believe that.
Yeah. So yardrock2024.com.
Base.
Right on.
Garland, your thoughts?
The thing about it is this. what it reeks of is desperation. I mean, let's face it, when your candidate, needs a service dog to find his way off the stage after pretty much every speech that he gives, really got to protect this guy. So the reality is that what they're showing is desperation. They don't know what to do. They cannot allow alternative perspectives to be heard. The things that RFK Jr. is saying, look, there's no perfect candidates. He's saying some things that are fantastic. He's saying some things that I might not like. I believe it's very good that he's running in the Democratic Party. Now, I don't think for 1 second the Democratic Party is going to allow him to win. They're so crooked. They've already said in a lawsuit that they can go in a smoke-filled room and choose the candidate, and if he wins, they will. But I'm glad to have that conversation to force them into that desperate corner and to do anything they can and to make it obvious to everyone what they're doing. They're going to have to stop everything. But the reality is this. I can't see any way that Joe Biden is going to be the candidate in 2024. At the rate of decline cognitively that we're seeing in him, there ain't no way this guy lasts another 2 years. Look at where he was from when he first got elected, which wasn't all that great, to where he is now when God save the Queen. That's not a stutter. You can't stutter out God save the Queen and you can't defend it. So now that they actually have to run polls and talk about him on MSNBC and CNN, that there's a poll of people who think he's mentally fit, to me, that tells us they know they're in trouble. They're starting that conversation so they can start to say, well, people are questioning him. Now we're questioning him. Oh, I guess we got to do something about it. Where's Gavin Newsom again? Somebody call Gavin Newsom to get that guy in here. And then, the good thing is,
I keep hearing his name. Go ahead, girl. I do keep hearing his name.
The good thing is, whoever it is, anybody that runs has to go along with the neoliberal war, capitalist warmongering. And RFK Jr., Cornel West, et cetera, are there to raise the kind of questions that will expose them. And I think that's a good thing.
I agree. Let's give Lee a chance to give his closing. I think we have Garland for maybe one more question. I do want to ask you about Taiwan, but let's give sure. Lee
Lee, absolutely.
Proper,
thank you for joining us.
Vetting. Thank you, Lee.
And any last things, anything you want to promote? As well, any last thoughts? Thank you for joining us. It's always fun to have you on.
The book, thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate the book you guys mentioned is at leecamp.net. People can get it there. All my other stuff's at leecamp.com. And also yardrock2024.com. It's a real website.
I was just about to show it. He sent the link and I looked at it and it's actually a real website. This is it right here.
Where can I get my bumper sticker?
It's on there. You can grab a bumper sticker.
Oh, good.
All right.
So make sure you guys check out Lee. He does great work. He does a fantastic work. Always good to have you on.
Right. Thank you guys. Keep at it.
Yeah, and I'll pass to you, CJ, for your question. Then we got super chat.
Because I've been, I went to your page because I was curious to find out some of your takes on Taiwan, because for me, maybe this Ukraine is foreshadowing or has some things we can say is foreshadowing or to come or preparing for, however, whatever phrasing you want to use, for really the fight with China, if there's going to be one. And I was curious when I found, where's that article I had from you? 1 second. Right here. Biden turning Taiwan into a Ukraine-style battlefield. His plans will result in the total destruction of Taiwan in a similar way that is resulted in the total destruction of Ukraine. But what are your thoughts on this Ukraine war being sort of the testing grounds for this larger fight with Taiwan? And do you think that the U.S. weapons-wise is in a position for any sort of fight with China?
A couple of things here. I would put it to you like this: the neocons, that their whole thing is the U.S. should lead the world order. We should be in charge. We should dominate everything, right? And no one should rise up to be powerful enough to challenge us. So this is really about Russia and China. It's about Russia and China are rising. They're become economically, militarily, diplomatically powerful around the world. So first, we must take Russia down, break them up, weaken Russia, and then go after China. So it's not a warm up. It's first you got to get this guy out of the way, and then you get China out of the way, and then maybe India and Iran. They're a little too big for their britches. It's about knocking everybody down so we can maintain world hegemony. That's the plan here, and that's where Ukraine falls into it. You got to get them done so you can weaken Russia. That's why they keep saying weaken Russia, because Russia and China are friends, and you got to weaken them and go after China, which is why China will back Russia to the hilt no matter what, because they know they're next on the menu. Now, this isn't you. Obviously, you never heard my Taiwan saga.
I have, and I wanted to kind of trigger you, but yes, I have, because I do study on my guests when they come on. And I wanted to trigger you, and you got right to the point. I was like, wow, I can't believe he missed the trigger point, but you were just waiting for it. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So for those listening who don't know, this is the story of a lifetime. It's incredible. So I did a tweet one time. I was waiting for shrimp tacos and guacamole. And I'm just for the hell of it. And I did this sarcastic tweet, this breaking news, right? President, White House insiders leaked that when asked if there'd ever be anything worse than I'm paraphrasing here, the destruction of Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. I said, President Biden responded, wait until you see my plan for the destruction of Taiwan. Now, that was supposed to be satire. The next day, the KMT, Kuomintang, they're the opposition party on Taiwan Island, started retweeting that tweet everywhere. And the people thought that I actually had leaked something from the White House. And that went completely viral. The foreign ministry of Taiwan contacted the State Department and said, did Biden say this? Well, we don't know what they said, but obviously we know. Immediately, the foreign ministry of Taiwan released a statement with my tweet. Garland Nixon tweeted this. However, there's no plan for the destruction, blah, blah, blah. Then it hits the mainland of China. Now, I don't know the numbers. I don't know the exact numbers. I do know there was an article written 2 weeks later, and it went viral on all of the social media in Taiwan and China. 2 weeks later, it was getting 150 million hits a day, that one tweet that I did. So it went completely. Immediately, so first Taiwan freaks out and they go to the US. The next day, Wang Yi, who was at the time, he was the foreign minister. He's moved up above that now. He was the foreign minister for China. He comes out at his daily meeting. Every question was about this Garland Nixon guy tweeting this tweet. He then demands that the United States government answers for their plan for the destruction of Taiwan. I looked at the next day. Wow. Right now, I guarantee you, if you search Garland Nixon Taiwan, literally millions of everything, it was everywhere. Snopes, PolitiFact, they then put something out. Did President Biden say there's a plan for the destruction of Taiwan? People were sending me in Taiwan, in China, they had like panels of like intellectuals and professors saying, well, if there's a plan for the destruction of Taiwan, how do you think they do it? Would they plant bombs? Would they? This thing just went absolutely insane. And I was contacted by people from in Asia who said, literally, and I'm not saying this to take any credit, I'm just saying this is what was said to me. Garland, you've done more to educate the people of Taiwan. I'm just waiting for shrimp tacos, for God's sake.
Oh,
Garland, the reason I bring this up, the reason I wanted to insert this is because I had a similar reaction, because once the algorithm started putting your tweets you tweet a lot, breaking news, and I was like, what? And I was falling for some of the things, and I was oh, this is satire. So I fell for it myself like many times, and I was like, wait a minute, and then I realized that's Garland Nixon, because they just recently began to allow your tweets into my algorithm or into my feed. So I fell for it myself, and I thought it was a great story.
Well, let me add this. Afterwards, I really think China jumped on that, because what they did a couple weeks later, this thing went ballistic. And Taiwan, I was told there's a conversation in Taiwan that wasn't there before that's really saying, what's going to happen to us? Are they going to blow us up? Are we going to? It was after Nord Stream. And so they were concerned, are they going to do us like they did Germany? The Chinese government then brought the KMT, the same party, the former president from that party, they brought him on a goodwill tour all through China. It's obvious that China jumped all over this. All these articles in the Global Times and China Daily, Xinjiang, this was everywhere. Then I look, it's in Europe. Yahoo, with the UK, Garland Nixon, literally my name and the tweet, and like a picture of the tweet. I'm like, oh my God, they're take me to Guantanamo for sure. But
was it scary? Was it really scary? It was probably scary though, right? Or no? Not for you?
Fun in a way, because that's just me. I thought it was fun. But oddly enough, it does appear that the conversation has really changed in Taiwan. There is great concern. The polls now say that the KMT will win. And there's, I think, great concern with the U.S. government that the puppet party they have come, I think it's November or January, may lose. And the other party it's a nationalist party, but it's not a pro-U.S. party. They don't want reunification with the mainland, but they don't want to get blown to hell. They don't want to get turned into Bakhmut. They're smart enough to know we don't want to be Bakhmut. And so I think the U.S. is concerned. So in a strange way, I think accidentally I had some input into what the hell's going on in Taiwan.
I do too. I absolutely, because you kind of solidify what they already were kind of thinking. Yeah. And it's like, and I can see why they ran with it, to be quite honest with you. But
one other thing I got to add.
Go ahead.
And that is, and you can imagine this. So afterwards, I did videos about it. I was on like television and all these interviews in China and Asia, etc. And I said, hey, look, it was sarcasm. That being said, they want to turn Taiwan into a battlefield between two nuclear powers. Regardless of whether it's sarcasm, the outcome will be the same. Taiwan will be destroyed. So I think the fact of the matter is, sometimes humor can touch a nerve. And it's like you said, there are people in Taiwan sitting there and they're not thinking about what's going to happen to me. And something comes out. And here's the interesting thing. Even after I came out and said, look, it was just sarcasm. And I even put on my Twitter file, purveyor of sarcasm. I'm thinking I better put something up here to try to protect myself. They didn't believe me. They didn't believe me. A lot of them didn't believe me. They thought, he got some insider information from the White House and he's just trying to hide it now because he didn't want to get in trouble. So even when I said it was sarcasm, but if you think about it, based on what's going on in Ukraine, the position they're being put in, when they look at the U.S. bombing the Nord Stream, it makes sense to them that they're being betrayed. And when I say, no, it was just sarcasm, they're going to be like, yeah, sure. You say it's sarcasm, but you ain't the one that's going to get blown to hell. We don't trust you, pal. You were telling the truth.
That's incredible.
That's funny. Go ahead, Nick.
I just, in the last election was a devastating moment for the separatist movement. And the West always like to manipulate polls, and you can always chime in on this if you want, Garland, but they always like to manipulate polls about Taiwan and how they feel about China. But 80% of the time when these people say they support the status quo, right, that is not what the United States is pushing for. That is not what they want. Taiwan to be separated from China and invest into United States companies and use that as a wedge to create issue and drama on the geopolitical world stage. So I hope the Taiwanese people see through this. And when I hear about the story, this is the first time I hear about this. I don't know how I missed this whole chapter of what down with you in Taiwan. But when I hear that, that shows that people in Taiwan do know what's up. They're not dumb. I think when it really comes down to it, I think a lot of people still going through their day by day. I think it's still not too big of a deal. But once it really hit the fan, once it really start getting close to the United States really pull the trigger on that, I think a lot. Well, I hope, maybe this hopium. I guess I will admit this hopium. I guess it's hopium.
A little bit.
My hopium is I hope that Taiwanese people don't fall for it. But anyway, any last thoughts you have on this, Garland?
Yeah, I'll say this. I think there's some good. I think there are some positive things going on. Europe has written this draft proposal. Whether it's going to be finished, whether they're going to publish it exactly as written or not, but the proposal says basically they don't want any problems with China. It says they're not going to support the EU. They're saying we're not going to decouple. We're not going to support basically any type of aggressive or assertive actions against China. So I think bit by bit, these neocons have gotten too far out over their skis, and now even the Europeans are saying, "Look, I mean, think about it. Mercedes and BMW, 40% of their sales are in China. You've got this market that's bigger than the U.S. and the EU together. You now have corporations in the EU saying, "Time out. You screwed us bad with Russia. It's suicide. It is economic suicide with China." And so the EU, a lot of even the vassals are starting to get off the sinking ship. I think this going into the 2024 election, the neocons are in a lot of trouble. I think it's an opportunity for people both who are anti-war, regardless of ideology. For those of us who are of more of a revolutionary nature, I think it is an opportunity for us to make our case to people, and people can see what's happening with neoliberal capitalism. They can see what's happening with imperialist foreign policy. And I think they're making the case for those of us who have a more revolutionary spirit to argue against this and to start waking some people up. I think it's a good and positive time for us. Hard times means hard work, right? So it's time for us to work hard.
Well said. Any last thoughts, CJ? I'm pretty much
no. That was perfect. I can't follow that because that was spot on.
So we have a few super chats, but we can get Garland out here. Any last thoughts? Anything you want to plug before we pop you out, Garland? Thank you for joining us.
I'm good. Thanks. I appreciate it. Keep up the good work, everyone, and keep up the good work you guys are doing. Certainly appreciate it. I just say I'm glad that Cornel West is running. I'm glad that RFK Jr. is running in the Democratic Party. I hope somebody else, anyone, even if it's somebody that I don't agree with on a lot of things, if somebody will run in the Democratic Party and just say, well, I don't think we should have these wars. I don't think we should have these bases. Anything that will keep that conversation going, because of course, the number one threat to humanity right now is a nuclear confrontation. And the Democratic Party right now, at this point, is the cutting edge, the leading edge that would take us to that level. So yes. I'm glad to see conversations arising more and more that are anti-war, that are even more, not just anti-war, anti-imperialism, because that's the foundation. The foundation of these wars is neoliberal capitalism and which drives imperialism, etc.
More.
Do you think that's why? Do you think that's why they're going after Trump so hard? Oh, his sound went out.
No, I can hear you.
There, it looks like. Oh yeah. Do you think that's why? Do you think that's why they're kind of throwing everything at Trump? It seems like they're intensifying, trying to not get him to run for president again. You think it's because he's publicly saying he's against the Iraq war? Do you think it has anything to do with that?
Yeah, Trump's not part of the team. And for as bad as he is on some things, there are areas that the machine, all they want is a puppet. The last thing they want is a person who won't go along with them on some things. And they're scared to death of Donald Trump because they don't know what he'll do. And he's angry now. And so he's going to want some revenge. And they know he may. Here's the other thing I think that the last thing I'll say. These people are so crooked and corrupt. They've got so many skeletons in their closet now. They cannot afford to have Trump or RFK Jr. or Cornel West or anyone in charge that might start lifting up rocks and looking under them and saying, whoa, wait a minute, you did this and this. They can't allow to have a person in charge of the FBI who's not completely corrupt and owned by the system who'll come in and say, let's start looking through this paperwork. Holy moly, you mean we did this? So they are really in a desperate position right now because they've been so corrupt. They've acted so illegally. They cannot afford to have a pair of unbiased eyes look at the things they've been doing because they'll all be in Guantanamo.
Yeah.
Well said, Garland. Thank you for joining us. I'm gonna get to some super chats. Always good to have you on, Garland. I appreciate
Thanks
it.
a lot. Got to run, and I really appreciate it, guys. Keep up the good work.
Have a good one, brother.
Thanks,
Have a
Garland.
good one.
See you, bro.
So we just have a few super chats. I want to make sure we get to before we wrap up. Just a few here. Thanks for the $2, Saul. It was a super power panel. Big shout out to Zoya, who helping us with booking, for helping us put this together. Thank you for super chat as well. Thank you for the $5, Luca. Remember all the psychologists who felt morally obligated as mental health professionals to call out Trump's mental incompetency? That's a great point. Where are they now? CJ, do you remember that? You mean there's all these mental health experts that was breaking their code.
They're at brunch with their phones off.
I think a lot of people calling that Iraq war thing because of his age, and I guess there may be some fact. I think that's more of a fraudulent slip, though. I think that people put him letting them off like that shit is haunting them, like, and they know they have big allies. Go ahead.
If you're having cognition issues, you may start to say what you really feel instead of repressing it. So
exactly. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point too. So thank you for the super chat, Luca. Thank you for the $2. Girl Fiend 97. Will Cornell be able to stand up to AIPAC? He challenging them on the narrative, like
I know they don't like him.
The amount of influence that they have over our government and how much money, if they really wanted to shut someone down, it will shut someone down. But standing up to them and being a thorn on their side and radicalizing new political minds to stand up to them, you can consider it a win based on whatever your particular role is. Like if you can rally support against AIPAC, that's a kind of a win, isn't it? Because we're not necessarily looking toward electoral politics wins. Because if we're looking to be an AIPAC electorally, man, that's a tough ask. But we can rally people against them and shift the narrative and consciousness over our country over a period of time. Thank you for $2, though. Thank you for $2, Yamlak. What is NATO's next move? Diplomatic or escalation? I think they're gonna make as much money out of disaster capitalism as possible, and while expanding the national security state, the police state. Look at France. You had police fucking the protesters up for protesting, and look at what they do in the United States. They're labeling people as domestic terrorists. So the ruling class already showed you their trick, which is why I told you you're not a populist, you're not anti-establishment. If you're not anti-police, if you're not against the police state, the ruling class is literally propping up the police state, and they say, yes, we're going to make shit worse, but we're going to have the giant national security state to cramp down on dissent. So as NATO protests escalate, as Americans start to escalate and protest against late-stage capitalism, guess who's there? The propped-up defense state that they've been doing for years and decades. Eric Adams is in New York to get the NYPD ready for the revolution. That's why he's there. LAPD is getting ready for the revolution right now. So I am saying this to answer your question broadly. The establishment is ready for escalation, and then whenever the working class is ready to retaliate, they're like, man, you guys build our ammunition up. That's why that's why we are abolitionists. This is why we call against the funding of the military. And you got people like Tucker Carlson and his ilk who like, yeah, we against the establishment, but they for giving the establishment more power and weapons, right? Tucker Carlson bitch about how people protest. So you're against the establishment, but you don't want people to protest. They're doing it. The protest is too mean for you. As the establishment stocking up weapons and stockpiles, using tear gas on people, you worry about how civil we are. So that's why I think there's only really only one movement that have revolutionary potential, and that comes from a Marxist, a revolutionary point of view. Anything else is just propping up the establishment power. But with that said, I'm not going to be a gatekeeper. If you work with me on issues you're good on, I'll work with you. But that's just my opinion. I don't think a lot of other movements are not going to finish the job, right? So if they follow me, I'm going to let them follow me, but I'm not going to follow them. I went on a rant there. There's a bite. I actually want to give them a shout out. Always leaving consistent super stickers. Thank you for biting. Thank you, Jay, for 999. Our friend in network. Thank you, Jay. For he said 45% of global ship manufacturing occurs in China. Some U.S. military equipment is manufactured in China. We outsource much of our industry to China. That any war with them will be lost before it begins. That's why the The only thing you can possibly, that's why I bring up the disaster capitalism. That's the only thing you can use to justify why they're doing this, because they know they can make a quick profit. I'm gonna die in a few decades anyway. Fuck the results, right? Which is why I don't understand it, because what they're doing, like, you're gonna have grandkids and shit, right? They don't give a fuck about that. They're like, man, I'm gonna die in 10, 12 years. I'm gonna be rich as fuck. I'm gonna make all these profits. I'm gonna make my legacy. I'm gonna use the media to silence all the dissent. When the winners create history. So the same way they lied about all these psychopaths and you learn about the truth about them growing up, that's what the Joe Biden, the Bill Cristols, and all these war criminals are relying on. They're relying on what the liberals are doing to George W. Bush for them. Like, they clean up my record. We own the means of information, and we can propagandize people. That was like Bill Gates is open on, and Bill Gates is hoping he's gonna buy the narratives where in 20, 30 years, he's gonna be this benevolent figure who helped humanity instead of and that's what they're gonna rely on. They profit now and die, live a fast, exciting life, and then allow the narrative that you control to do PR for you. Anyway, I'm ranting. CJ, any last thoughts? Great.
No, that's a great tweet or a great super chat from Jay. Thanks, Jay. I think I'm gonna be off the next couple of days. Looking for.
Same here. I gotta take a few days off too. I'll be back on Monday.
Days. But we had a great week. I mean, we had some. This whole entire week have been some bangers. So we came back hard. Even though we're both kind of makeshift places where we're just
after banger.
Yeah. So we did our thing. So we deserve a couple of days off just to recuperate and settle with our housing. So
after banger.
That's all I got. I just got a closing video. So unless you got something, Nick, we'll just play the closing video.
After banger to this week. After banger. So hope you guys catch up. Take some time, catch up. I have some personal stuff to handle. CJ has some personal stuff to handle. I'll be back on Monday, but this has been a fun week.
And I think this Monday is the post duopoly show. I think is back this week. Yeah, I think it's back.
Oh, nice. So post duopoly show will be next live show, at least for I think
banger again.
Sabby show tomorrow. So banger after banger on RBN. Hit the subscription.
And today is Sabby and JB in 30 minutes. Sabby and JB.
They go back in 30. Dang,
I saw the flyer. Yeah, I saw the flyer. I hope that I'm not speaking out of turn, but I did see the flyer that was made.
Banger.
We've been on the road.
I'll see you guys Monday. I'll see you guys around, guys. Peace.
All right, so we'll end with this video. Jeffrey Sachs speaking about. I think this one's about the Ukraine war. So let's watch now. Make sure you hit that like button on the way out. Oh, actually, I should say. Make sure you join our Substack too, and go check out our website. There has been some updates. We're going to be updating the button for the Boston chapter where you can go and put in a ticket. People in the Boston chapter know what that means. You're going to be able to put your ticket, and we're going to begin selling merchandise, buttons, and stickers. That's going to be on the website. They're working on it this entire weekend. I'm not saying it's up yet, but you can go check out our website for what's up so far. Outside of that, I think that is it. Don't forget running a fundraiser for housing. 3K still needed. And let me bring this down. You can see where's the other one? Where you can send funds if you have it, if you wanted to send donations. I'll also put in the GoFundMe in the description box in about 10 minutes, so you can check that out. Outside of that, here is the closing video. Thank you. Hit that like button on your way out. Thank you again.
The United States has a very hard time thinking through the eyes of anyone else. And when I say U.S., I'm meaning literally a small group of a few hundred people. I'm not speaking about the American people. They're not told anything about this. And just as a footnote, I've tried to explain the role of NATO in this to the New York Times, and they will not print anything on this. They've written 26 editorials since February 24th, 2022, that this is an unprovoked war. I called them, I wrote to them, I said I've advised all these leaders, these countries, I've been through this for 3 decades. can you give me 700 words? The answer is no. There's a complete unwillingness to have any discussion about this. If you do, you're put on Ukraine's blacklist and you're put on America's no-show list in the mainstream media. It's really quite something. One more thing
sorry,
that's
please, go ahead,
worth everybody understanding. This is not about Democrats and Republicans. This is not at all about partisan politics. Biden is no different from so many other presidents. It's not, this one's crazy, this one's not crazy. They're all a little bit, but this is about really state policy in the deepest structure in Washington. And it's the armed services committees, it's the very $900 billion military budgets. You have to test your weapons, believe me. You need wars, not so infrequently. You have to be ready. You have to teach China a lesson. In the minds of this small group, this war is as much about China as it is about anything else. Isn't that surprising? It's hard to think the way they think, but you cannot actually discuss this in the United States right now in the mainstream. Of course, there are 1,000 outlets to discuss things, but not in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, MSNBC, CNN, forget it.
Okay, first, if you're going to ask a question, don't point at me and don't be disrespectful to me. I'm the mayor of this city, and treat me with the respect I deserve to be treated. I'm speaking to you as an adult. Don't stand in front like you treated someone that's on the plantation that you own. Give me the respect I deserve and engage in a conversation up here in Washington Heights. Treat me with the same level of respect I treat you. So don't be pointing at me. Don't be disrespectful to me. Speak with me as an adult because I'm a grown man. I walked into this room as a grown man, and I'm going to walk out of this room as a grown man. I answered your question. Go to the